Chris Evans was sitting in a Taco Bell, trying to go unnoticed, when he saw a mother struggling to pay for her son's birthday meal. What he did next set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The afternoon breeze was chilly, but Emily held tightly to Jake's small hand as they walked toward Taco Bell. She looked at him, seeing the excitement shining in his brown eyes. A childlike energy that in that moment was her only source of joy. "Today's my day, right, Mom?" Jake asked, clutching his dinosaur-patterned backpack and improvised Christmas gift from last year. His voice was full of anticipation and joy, untouched by the harsh reality he was too young to fully understand. "It sure is, champ. All about you today," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She knew this simple trip to a fast food restaurant was the closest she could come to giving him a birthday celebration. As they walked, Emily tried to push aside the constant math running through her mind. She counted and recounted the money in her wallet, imagining ways to stretch those few dollars. With every step, a sense of guilt grew in her chest. She wanted more for Jake, but lately, all she could offer were empty promises and an exhausting effort to seem optimistic. "Will there be cake too, Mom?" Jake's question nearly made her stumble. He looked up at her with a smile missing a tooth, a pure, unfiltered smile she never wanted to dim. "Today's your day, champ," she repeated, crouching to adjust his jacket. "But remember what we talked about? We could only pick one thing, and you chose lunch. It's going to be special, okay?" Her voice was gentle, but she felt the weight of every word, fearing she might disappoint him. Jake nodded, bobbing his head as if he understood, but Emily caught a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Okay, Mom," he said, turning his gaze forward. He was too young to hide his emotions, and it broke Emily's heart. As they walked, Emily stole glances at her son. The way he spoke, the way he jumped over every crack in the sidewalk, the way his face lit up over the smallest details, all of it reminded her she was doing her best. But was it enough? Emily thought back to how drastically her life had changed 5 years ago. Jake was only 2 months old when his father decided he wasn't ready for parenthood. Since then, she had faced loneliness, exhaustion, and the overwhelming pressure of being everything to someone so small. Jake was her strength, but even the strongest foundations can waver. "Tired, Mom?" Jake asked suddenly, noticing Emily's slower pace. "A little, but nothing that'll stop me from taking you out for a special lunch," she replied, gripping his hand a little tighter. She didn't want him to see how truly drained she was, physically and emotionally. When they finally reached Taco Bell, Emily paused for a moment at the entrance. She opened her small wallet, double-checking that the money was still there. $6.45, just enough for a kid's meal and a small drink. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and squared her shoulders as if bracing herself for an emotional battle. Jake's eyes lit up as he looked at the colorful menu on the restaurant wall. He pointed excitedly at the pictures, his enthusiasm contagious. "Can I get that big taco, Mom? It looks so cool." Emily smiled, pretending to consider the menu, even though she already knew exactly what they'd order. "Of course, champ. Let's make this day the best, okay?" She held his hand tightly, more for her own reassurance than his. Together, they stepped inside, and Emily steeled herself to hide her sadness behind a smile. Emily adjusted her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked into the restaurant with Jake. Little did she know, in just a few hours, something unexpected would happen. Something that wouldn't just make Jake's birthday unforgettable, but would also change their lives forever. The scent of warm, spiced food filled the air as Emily and Jake stepped into Taco Bell. The restaurant wasn't very crowded, which gave Emily a slight sense of relief. Any public embarrassment would be harder to bear with a large audience. Jake held her hand eagerly, his eyes glued to the oversized menu board above the counter. "Look, Mom, they have giant tacos," he exclaimed, pointing to a picture of a combo meal that came with a drink and fries. Emily smiled and nodded, even though she already knew she could only afford the simplest item from the kids' menu. They walked up to the counter, where a young, distracted cashier greeted them with an indifferent expression. "Good afternoon, what can I get you today?" Forcing a warm smile, Emily replied, "We'll have the kids' taco combo, please." She glanced at Jake, who stood excitedly by her side, and added, "And a small soda, right, champ?" Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Mom. And fries too." Emily swallowed hard. "The fries don't come with the combo, sweetheart, but the taco will be really tasty. You're going to love it." Jake seemed a little disappointed, but didn't argue. He simply watched as the cashier punched in the order and walked away to prepare the meal. Emily felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She wanted to say yes to everything he asked for, but she couldn't. Not today. When the order was ready, Emily carefully carried the tray to a table near the window. Jake sat across from her, happily swinging his legs under the table. Emily set his plate in front of him and sat down with a cup of water in her hands. There wasn't enough money left for her to order anything for herself, but that didn't matter. What mattered was Jake's happiness. "Aren't you eating, Mom?" he asked, frowning as he unwrapped his taco. "No, sweetheart, I'm not hungry," Emily lied with a smile. "Seeing you happy fills me up." Jake studied her for a moment as if trying to understand, then shrugged and began eating. Emily watched him with a smile, but inside she felt hollow. It wasn't just hunger, it was the weight of knowing that even moments meant for joy were tinged with sacrifice. As Jake ate, Emily noticed glances coming from nearby tables. An older couple looked at her with kindness, while a younger, well-dressed woman gave her a cold, judgmental stare. Emily tried to ignore the gazes, but she knew what they meant. She had felt the weight of those mixed looks of empathy and judgment many times before. Jake, however, was blissfully unaware. He chatted about school, his friends, and his dream of becoming a paleontologist. "I'm going to study dinosaurs, Mom, and I'll take you to see a real fossil." Emily chuckled softly. "I'd love that, champ. I know you're going to be the best paleontologist the world has ever seen." She wanted to believe Jake's future would be full of opportunities, but at that moment it felt almost impossible to imagine a different path for them. Overdue bills, mounting rent, and the lack of a better job loomed over her like a dark cloud. But Jake was her. As Jake ate, Emily noticed glances coming from nearby tables. An older couple looked at her with kindness, while a younger, well-dressed woman gave her a cold, judgmental stare. Emily tried to ignore the gazes, but she knew what they meant. She had never seen a paleontologist before, but she knew what it was like to be a paleontologist. Overdue bills, mounting rent, and the lack of a better job loomed over her like a dark cloud. But Jake was her light. As Jake finished the last bite of his taco, he looked at Emily with bright eyes. "Now we can get the cake, right, Mom?" Emily's heart sank. She had been bracing for this question, but it still hit her hard. Taking a deep breath, she replied in the calmest voice she could muster. "Jake, remember what we talked about? Today we could only pick one thing, and you chose lunch, remember?" Jake's expression changed. His smile faded slowly, and he stared at the empty plate in front of him. "But it's my birthday," he said in a voice so soft, Emily almost didn't hear it. Emily reached across the table to hold his hand. "I know, my love, and you're the most special boy in the world even without a cake." Jake didn't respond. He just nodded, but his disappointment was clear. Emily felt a wave of sadness crash over her chest, but maintained a faint smile. She couldn't break down, not here, not in front of him. Emily stood up to throw away the trash and grab an extra napkin for Jake. When she returned, he was still sitting quietly, playing with his straw. The guilt weighed on her again, but before she could say anything to cheer him up, Jake whispered, "I really wanted a cake, Mom." She opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a familiar voice. It was the cashier, approaching their table. "Excuse me, ma'am, just a reminder. The payment hasn't been processed yet. It's $6.45. Emily froze. She was sure she'd already paid when she placed the order. Pulling out her wallet, she realized there was nothing left but a few coins. I thought I had already paid. There must be some mistake," she said, trying to hide the panic in her voice. The cashier rolled her eyes. "It's just what's missing, ma'am. Or maybe I made a mistake. Sorry about that." Emily forced an embarrassed smile, but her face burned. She could feel the stares from the other tables intensifying, and all she wanted was to leave. Jake looked at her with worry, sensing that something was wrong. Jake looked at Emily, confused and slightly concerned, as she rummaged through her wallet for money she didn't have. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. What happened next didn't just save Jake's birthday. It started a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The silence inside Taco Bell felt heavier than ever. Emily could feel Jake's gaze fixed on her as she rummaged through her wallet for the third time. A few coins spilled onto the table, their clinking sound echoing in the nearly empty restaurant. Every noise seemed amplified. Every whisper from other customers felt like it was aimed directly at her. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding like a muffled drum in her chest. Jake leaned forward in his seat, looking at his mother's face with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his small voice hesitant and worried. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily replied quickly, trying to mask her panic. "Everything's fine, just give me a moment." The silence inside the restaurant was suffocating. As Emily desperately searched her wallet for the third time, Jake, sitting beside her, watched with innocent yet worried eyes. Emily could feel the stares from the surrounding tables, some curious, others judgmental. She knew exactly what they were thinking. Why would someone come out to eat without enough money? "Ma'am," the waitress's voice broke through Emily's spiraling thoughts. laced with impatience. "You're $2 short. And just a reminder, tips are part of the team's wages." She crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on Emily's hunched figure. Emily swallowed hard, feeling the sting of humiliation in her throat. I thought I had enough," she replied, her voice trembling. She'd placed the remaining coins on the table, trying to count again, but the math stayed the same. Jake looked from her to the waitress. "Can we pay later, Mom? Like when we order food at home?" His innocent suggestion was a simple solution to him, but his words only deepened Emily's shame. "That's not how it works, kid," the waitress snapped, not even sparing him a glance. Her tone was cold and dismissive, cutting Emily like a knife. "If everyone did that, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs." Emily took a deep breath, fighting the urge to over-apologize or burst into tears. I can run home and bring the money," she suggested, trying to stay composed. "I live close by. It won't take long." The waitress scoffed. "Ma'am, we've heard that excuse plenty of times. I'll get the manager to sort this out." She spun on her heel and walked toward the counter. The waitress returned to the counter and whispered something to the manager. Both of them shot quick glances toward Emily and Jake's table, the waitress discreetly pointing in their direction. The manager appeared to consider for a moment before shaking his head, signaling for her to handle the situation. Emily watched from a distance, knowing that their hushed exchange was about her. She felt small and visible, just another inconvenience on an ordinary workday for these people. When the waitress came back to the table, her expression was even more rigid. "Ma'am, the manager says if you can't pay now, you'll need to leave something as collateral, maybe an ID, for example, until the bill is settled. Or we can call the authorities." Her tone was flat, rehearsed, devoid of empathy. Emily's eyes widened. "Call the authorities," she repeated, stunned. It's just $2. $2 in the tip," the waitress corrected, crossing her arms again. "And yes, we call the police to discourage people from thinking they can just walk out. It's nothing personal, just protocol." Jake tugged at his mother's jacket sleeve, clearly nervous. "Are we going to jail, Mom?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily's heart shattered. "No, sweetheart, of course not. I'll handle this." With trembling hands, Emily searched through her jacket and bag again, hoping to find something she might have missed. Anything. A crumpled bill, a coupon, a forgotten coin. But there was nothing. "Please," she pleaded, looking up at the waitress. "I can be back in 20 minutes. My apartment is just nearby. I wouldn't do this if I had any other choice." The waitress hesitated for a brief moment, but her gaze hardened again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't take that risk. I've lost enough money that way before." Jake, who'd been silent until then, looked up at the waitress with teary eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice shaking. "Today's my birthday. We just wanted to celebrate." The waitress averted her gaze for a second, but quickly regained her composure. "I'm sorry," she said curtly, "but that doesn't change the rules." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling frustration and humiliation bubbling inside her. Her mind raced for a solution, but every path seemed blocked. She stood slowly, the weight of every stare in the restaurant pressing down on her. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll leave my wallet here and come back with the money." The waitress shrugged, seemingly satisfied with the solution. "Fine, but make it quick." Emily took a deep breath and looked at Jake. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart. Stay right here, okay?" Jake nodded, though his eyes showed he was scared. Emily brushed a hand through his messy hair before turning and walking toward the door. As Emily crossed the restaurant, feeling the judgmental eyes on her every step, Jake sat quietly at the table, gripping his soda cup tightly. What neither of them knew was that in just a few minutes, something entirely unexpected would happen. Something that would change the course of their day forever. As Emily crossed the restaurant, feeling the judgmental eyes on her every step, Jake sat quietly at the table, gripping his soda cup tightly. What neither of them knew was that in just a few minutes, something entirely unexpected would happen. Something that would change the course of their day forever. The cashier at the counter still looked irritated when Chris approached. He placed a $50 bill on the counter and spoke softly. "Can I pay for that woman and her son, and add something special for them, please?" The cashier blinked, stunned as she recognized him. You're... Chris gave her a small smile and raised a finger to his lips, signaling for discretion. "Shh, no need to announce anything, just a gesture. Let them enjoy their day." The cashier nodded, now slightly flustered. "Okay, sir. I'll take care of it. Is there anything specific you'd like to add?" Chris thought for a moment. "Maybe a cake. It looks like it's the boy's birthday." "Of course," the cashier replied, looking at him with newfound admiration. "I'll bring the cake to their table." Chris offered a brief smile. "Thank you." He turned and left the restaurant before anyone could notice him, leaving behind a quiet act of kindness that he hoped would make their day a little brighter. A few minutes later, Emily returned to the restaurant, clutching $2 crumpled in her hands, her face still clouded with worry. She hurried back to the table where Jake was waiting, but as she approached, she stopped mid-step. Sitting on the table was a small cake, decorated with whipped cream and colorful sprinkles, a single candle glowing on top. Jake sat with his hands clasped, staring at the cake with a shy smile. "Mom, look," Jake exclaimed, pointing at the cake as soon as he saw her. "The lady brought it. She said it was a gift." Emily blinked, confused, as she slid into the seat beside her son. "A gift? From who?" Jake shrugged. "She just said someone paid for it and that I should enjoy my birthday." Emily glanced around the restaurant, searching for answers. Finally, she called the waitress over, who approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me," Emily began, still bewildered. "What happened here? I stepped out for a few minutes and now there's a cake on the table. I don't understand." The waitress smiled faintly, looking slightly awkward. "A customer paid for your bill, ma'am. He also asked us to add the cake because it's your son's birthday." Emily sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just heard. "A customer? Who?" The waitress hesitated, then leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "It was Chris Evans," she said, almost whispering. Emily's eyes widened. "Chris Evans?" The waitress nodded. "Yes," he said. "He didn't want any attention, but he paid for everything before leaving." Emily was frozen in disbelief. She turned to Jake, who was happily munching on a piece of the cake, completely unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened. "Chris Evans," Emily murmured, still struggling to wrap her head around it. "Why would someone like him do this?" The waitress offered a small smile. "He seemed like a really kind person. That's all." Emily sat next to Jake, still processing everything. She looked at her son's animated face, now entirely focused on his birthday cake. "Mom, do you think he's a superhero?" Jake asked, glancing up at her. Emily smiled, wiping away a tear that escaped the corner of her eye. "I think sometimes regular people do things that seem like superhero stuff, sweetheart. And today, I think he was ours." Jake grinned and went back to eating, swinging his legs happily under the table. Emily glanced once more toward the restaurant door, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of him again. But Chris was already gone, leaving behind more than just a paid bill or a birthday cake. He had left a spark of hope, something Emily hadn't felt in a long time. As Emily and Jake finished the cake, she knew this day would not end as it had begun. Little did she know, that small act of kindness was just the beginning of a series of events that would transform their future forever. That night, back in the small apartment they called home, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the restaurant. Jake was in the living room, playing with his dinosaurs and humming a cheerful tune, a reflection of his joy from the birthday cake. Emily, however, sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Chris Evans. She still couldn't believe that one of the most famous actors in Hollywood had not only paid their bill, but also made sure Jake got a birthday cake. She opened her wallet and saw the money she had taken to Taco Bell. It was still there, untouched. Those $2 now seemed to symbolize something far greater. A second chance. Jake wandered into the kitchen, holding 2 plastic dinosaurs in his hands. "Mom, today was the best birthday ever." Emily chuckled, wiping away a tear. "It really was, champ. It really was." Jake looked at her curiously. "Do you think that man will come back? The guy with the cake?" Emily sighed and shook her head. "I don't know, Jake. But even if he doesn't, he already did something really special for us. That's what matters." Jake nodded, satisfied with her answer. "I want to be like him when I grow up. I want to help people too." Emily stood and hugged her son tightly. "And you will, sweetheart. You will." The next morning, while Jake was at school, Emily was tidying up the kitchen. She opened her old laptop to search for jobs. But the familiar wave of discouragement returned as she scrolled through the usual listings. Low wages and impossible hours for a single mother. She was about to close the computer when her phone rang. Emily frowned. She didn't get many calls. She answered hesitantly. "Hello? Good morning. Is this Emily Carter?" A man's voice asked on the other end. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" "My name is Steve Parker. I'm the manager of a local supermarket here in town. I was at the same restaurant as you last night and saw what happened." Emily froze. "Oh, you were at Taco Bell?" "Yes," Steve replied kindly. "I was impressed by how you handled the situation. I know it must have been a tough moment, but you stayed calm and put your son first. That says a lot about the kind of person you are." Emily didn't know what to say. "I thank you," But why are you calling me? Well, Steve continued. I was thinking my supermarket is hiring. It's a customer service position, but with flexible hours and a slightly better than average wage. We also offer benefits like health insurance, which I imagine could be helpful for you and your son. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're offering me an interview? Yes, Steve said with a smile in his voice. I'd love for you to come by so we can talk more about it. What do you think? Emily's heart raced. It felt like the universe was finally working in her favor. Of course I'd love to. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Steve replied. Just come by tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll send you the address. I'll be there, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. When she hung up, she stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the news. For the first time in a long while, something good had happened without her having to fight desperately for it. When Jake came home from school that afternoon, Emily was waiting with a beaming smile. He dropped his backpack on the floor and ran to her. Mom, why are you so happy? Emily knelt in front of him, holding his small hands. Remember yesterday when that man paid for our meal and bought you a cake? Yeah, it was the best day of my life, Jake said enthusiastically. Well, I think that day brought us more than just a cake, Emily said with a smile. Today, I got a phone call. A man who was at the restaurant last night saw what happened, and he wants to give me a job opportunity. Jake's eyes widened. Really, Mom? That's amazing. Yes, sweetheart. If everything goes well, I'll have a new job, one that will help us a lot. Jake threw his arms around her in a tight hug. I knew everything would work out, Mom. It's because of the cake guy, isn't it? He's like an angel. Emily laughed, shaking her head. Maybe he is, Jake. Maybe he is. Across town, Chris Evans sat in a modest cafe, sipping a black coffee and reading a book. He had returned to Taco Bell the day before for a quiet moment of normalcy, hoping to remain unnoticed. But when he saw Emily and Jake in a difficult situation, he knew he couldn't just look away. He hadn't expected thanks or recognition. To him, it was just a small gesture, something anyone could do. But deep down, he understood the profound impact such acts of kindness could have. The cafe barista approached with the bill. Here you go, Mr. Evans. Big fan of your work, by the way. Chris smiled politely. Thank you, he replied, and you're doing great work here. As he watched the activity around him, he noticed a father helping his child cut their food and a waitress smiling warmly at an elderly customer who seemed lonely. Small gestures, he thought. These little moments were what kept the world turning. He paid his bill and left without drawing attention, leaving a generous tip on the table. Before walking out, he turned to the barista and said, "You're doing a great job. Keep it up." As he strolled down the street, Chris felt a quiet sense of peace. He knew he couldn't change the world on his own, but sometimes all it took was a single act of kindness. And with that, he continued day by day, spreading a bit of light wherever he went. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.